Hi, back again. This is my part 2 of my video series talking about all the movies I've seen up until movie number 1000. The last video was all about thrillers and horror movies. This is going to be all about animation and comedy and coming of age movies. So this is much more lighthearted, I would say. I thought what better way to start an animation video than by talking about one of the best animated movies of ever, and that is the Lego Movie. Actually, I think the Lego Movie is one of the best animated movies because it's not just funny and very creative and very entertaining, has a good story, but actually it uses Legos not just for advertisement, but actually makes a compelling story around it. I think the first movie also works mostly because it's so incredibly funny, and the second movie, Lego Movie 2, the second part, is simply just very boring because of that. It's not very funny, even though it still has very great animation and decent story. Playmobil, the movie, only exists because the Lego Movie worked, not because it would be a good movie, and I remember absolutely nothing about this film. And I gotta say, the Emoji Movie was actually more enjoyable than I would think. It's still very cringe, and that's the main reason for why it doesn't work, but it could be worse, and worse is Playmobil, the movie. The Emoji Movie is Sony Animation, and so let's talk about all of Sony's animation movies that I've seen. The first ones are the Hotel Transylvania movies. I think the first Hotel Transylvania is a fine, fun movie. It has a good plot, but not really anything exciting that would make me want to rewatch this. Hotel Transylvania 2, the same thing. It's basically the same. Hotel Transylvania 3, Summer Vacation, is the one that I remember the least because I've watched all of these movies in a marathon, and this simply was the one that I just got tired of a little bit. And 4 years later, they made Hotel Transylvania, Transformania, which was easily the most fun out of the whole series, even though it was the shortest. It definitely was the most creative and just has this cartoon energy that makes it stand out a lot more in front of the other three movies. In 2021, they came out with The Mitchells vs. the Machines, which is a movie that I think is very well animated and creative, but I didn't really care about the story. But in the same year, they also came out with Wish Dragon, which is a movie that is exactly the other way around. I cared much more about the story, but the animation is very dull and lifeless. Moving on to DreamWorks animations, starting with Kung Fu Panda. Kung Fu Panda 1 is easily one of my favorite animated movies. There's a lot of great humor in this film again, and a lot of great characterization to the characters, and also surprisingly a lot of good action. And just like with the Lego Movie 2, I thought Kung Fu Panda 2 was not as funny anymore, and therefore I cared about the movie a lot less, even though the animation got a big upgrade in this film. And Kung Fu Panda 3 takes a big turn because it doesn't try to be more funny, it's actually more emotional from a character perspective, and that's why I think this movie is probably my favorite out of the whole trilogy right now. Shrek is fine. I am not the hugest Shrek fan. I think the movies are good, they are very funny, but I don't think they are incredibly outstanding in any way, especially not the animation. Shrek 2 is kind of an upgrade in every single standpoint because it has better animation and it has just a little bit more energy to it, in my opinion. Shrek the Third is easily the least memorable, not for any specific reason, I just didn't think this movie was as funny as the first two. And Shrek Forever After does the same thing as Kung Fu Panda 3. It's a lot less funnier, but a lot better from a character perspective, and I cared about Shrek a lot more than I cared about him in the other three movies. Puss in Boots, or Puss in Boots, I guess takes nothing from the original Shrek movies. It's more of an adventure type movie that isn't as funny and doesn't have the greatest action. It's just a very fine, enjoyable film. Moving on to Disney, I have not seen any Disney movies. I started a marathon, but I realized I wouldn't get the marathon finished until I reached 1,000 movies, so I just stopped instantly. I watched Oliver and Company, which is a fine movie that is just very forgettable. I watched Raya and the Last Dragon, which is another movie that is very forgettable and has very okay animation and a pretty decent story in my opinion. Encanto, in my opinion, is the much better movie from 2021. This has a great story, and even though it's not as memorable, in my opinion, in some moments it easily has a great story and one of the best songs to have come out in the last year. And that's actually it. I have also seen Cruella, which was a fun movie with fine characters, a very nice flow, good soundtrack, and great costume design, but a movie I did not care as much about because, I don't know. The next big animation studio is Pixar, and yeah, I really love Pixar, much more than Disney or DreamWorks or any other animation studio. Starting with Toy Story. Toy Story, directed by John Lasseter, is a movie that doesn't really impress me on the first watch, but I think this movie grew on me a lot more when I watched the other three because the characters are just a lot more fleshed out at that point. So I really appreciate this movie as kind of the first step of this franchise. And also, I mean, it's the first 3D animated feature-length film, so it's already very impressive in that standpoint. Toy Story 2 does a great job at expanding the universe and making a bigger, more fun, more energetic story. Toy Story 3 actually tops that even more and is even more fun, looks even better, and is just very emotional for the end of that trilogy. And even though I didn't think that Toy Story 4 was really needed, it definitely doesn't hurt that it's there, because it's not just a good send-off for the human characters, but also for the toy characters. And if there's another one, I don't think it would have worked as well, because this is just a great ending to this series in my opinion. The spin-off of Toy Story, Lightyear, steals a lot from different movies, Interstellar and the Lego Movie 2 of all movies. So I don't think it's very impressive from a story perspective, but also just in general. I think this is very generic and boring. Pixar's second movie, A Bug's Life, is also directed by John Lasseter, and I think this is also a very fun, very entertaining movie with great world building and interesting characters. And after that, John Lasseter has kind of a downfall because he directed the first Cars movie, and Cars is just very bad. I really hate the characters in Cars, and especially because I think the whole movie would have worked just as well if they just made humans out of the cars. There's no real reason for them to be cars, and that's just kind of annoying me. In Cars 2, that's even more the case, because they just had a very boring spy movie and they thought, okay, how could we make this more interesting? Let's make them cars. And yeah, it's very boring, doesn't work at all. And Cars 3 is actually the best movie in the Cars series, because it shows how it is to be a car and it's about cars. But because I despise all the characters at this point so much, because I've already had 2 movies with them, I also don't enjoy them in this one either. Moving on to Pete Docter, which is probably one of the most creative and versatile Pixar directors. Firstly, Monsters Inc. I think this movie is pretty fine, but it doesn't really have the most interesting story. The best thing about this whole movie is easily the world building, in my opinion. Monsters University is one of the only Pixar movies I've seen as a child, and I think even though this movie is very fun to watch, it kind of destroys the whole world building of the first movie, because it creates 2 plot holes that are so major that it doesn't really make sense why the first one would even exist. Up is a great movie. I don't just love the first sequence, because I think the heart of this movie is also present in the whole story until the very end. I think this is very exciting and very, very tragic, but also a very hopeful movie with a lot of great characters. Inside Out easily has some of the best world building I think I've ever seen in a movie in general, and easily some of the best animation that Pixar has ever put out. And Soul is a movie I don't think I appreciated as much, because I hyped this up very much and it wasn't quite what I expected, but I think this is one of the most mature Pixar movies with also some of the best animation I think I've ever seen. Finding Nemo is directed by Andrew Stanton, and this is easily the most perfect movie that Pixar's ever put out. It's so detailed with its world building, it has an amazing story, and it's just exciting from every single minute. I didn't think Finding Dory was very necessary, but I can't complain, because I thought this movie was incredibly entertaining as well, and Dory is actually not annoying. I think she's one of the best parts about the first movie, and even though she's very present in this movie, I don't think that ruins it a lot. I think it's actually great having her as a main character. And I mean, WALL-E is obviously also one of the best, not just Pixar movies, but movies in general. This has so amazing visual storytelling, and even though it switches up a lot in the second half of the movie, it still works very well. The Incredibles, directed by Brad Bird, is a fine movie. I'm not that excited about the first Incredibles. I think it's a good superhero movie that is pretty fun, but doesn't really interest me a lot. And more so even the second movie, Incredibles 2, which just kind of fits into this whole era where a lot of superhero movies came out, and this is just a very generic example of superhero movies of the 2010s, in my opinion. And Brad Bird's third movie, Ratatouille, is also not that my thing, in my opinion, because I think the main character, like the human character, is just so uninteresting and unspecial that it just kind of made me not care about the whole movie as much, even though I still think that the ending is quite sweet. And now for all the other movies, I think Brave is the most Disney movie that Pixar's ever put out, but it still works because it's much more entertaining and much more emotional, in my opinion, than the very similar Disney movie Brother Bear. The Good Dinosaur has the same problem as the first and second Cars movies. I'm very annoyed by the characters, but I'm also just annoyed because I'm wondering, why are these dinosaurs? The story is basically about humans, but they made it dinosaurs, so it's a little bit more interesting, but it really isn't. Coco should be one of the best Pixar movies, and I think just like Ratatouille, the end is very emotional, but the whole journey to go to that, the whole story is just very fine. Onward is the most fantasy movie that Pixar has put out in a way, like the most traditional fantasy movie, but it doesn't really take advantage of that very well. I think it's a very boring universe, even though I still think that this is one of the best and most surprising ends that Pixar has put out. Luca knows exactly what it is. It's a very sweet, short movie with cute animation and a great emotional story that I could just rewatch any day. And Turning Red is easily the most anime-like movie that Pixar has put out. It's very fun, very inconsequential, but incredibly entertaining, and I love every character in this film. Moving on to easily one of the best animation studios to one of the worst animation studios, which is Illumination, starting with Sing. This movie is incredibly bad, has no heart, and the only appeal about this movie is, hey, let's see some cute animals sing incredible pop songs that are just not used in a very good way. The Lorax. The Lorax is also a pretty fine movie. I don't care about the original books or anything that much, so I don't really care about these ones either. And yeah, I think this is entertaining, but not really something that would affect me a lot. The Secret Life of Pets is the same appeal as Sing. Let's see some talking pets do some cute stuff, but they didn't really have creativity to make a interesting plot that is still interesting after 20 minutes. So after that, it's just kind of a ramble about animals doing shit, and it's not very entertaining. Even more so with The Secret Life of Pets 2, which has 3 different stories that don't work as well in a whole movie, even though one of them, only one of them, is actually pretty good. The first Despicable Me movie is very fun and actually the most creative I think that Illumination has ever been. It's unique and very funny in my opinion. The same goes with Despicable Me 2. I also think this works as a sequel. It's not boring yet. Yeah, it's fine. Despicable Me just has a problem of not being creative again. Like, they don't really know how to make something new and interesting out of the characters from the first 2 movies, so they just kind of made something, and I mean, it's kind of entertaining, but not really. And then they made Minions, because the Minions are popular, and the Minions are not main character potential. They are just so dull, and the only thing good about this movie are the first like 2 minutes, like a montage scene, and that's like very fun, but after that, that's just it, kind of. And Minions: The Rise of Gru is actually fun. In this one, they added Gru again, so it's more of a main character in this film, not just the Minions, and yeah, I think this movie was just kind of cute, and the Minions actually didn't annoy me as much as in the first Minions movie. Now for some animated movies that are based on TV shows. The first one is the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. This movie is great. It actually uses its bigger budget that they had for making a movie for the cinemas to its fullest potential. And in my opinion, this is incredibly creative, very fun, just so many jokes in so little time, and yeah, just ridiculous. The SpongeBob movie Sponge Out of Water has the same concept in the first 2 acts in my opinion, and it still works very well, but I think the whole last act with different animation just felt kind of like an Avengers movie with references that didn't need to be there, but I still think that for the most part this film is pretty fun. And then the SpongeBob movie Sponge on the One just kind of ruins everything. This has worse animation and just uses cameos for the sake of cameos, not because they actually have a point to the story. The only one that works is Keanu Reeves, and yeah, that's basically the only good thing about this whole film. South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut is a South Park movie. I don't know what else to say. It's very funny. Like the first SpongeBob movie, the Simpsons movie used its budget to make a more cinematic and kind of grander Simpsons movie, but I'm not the hugest Simpsons fan, so this is not as memorable to me. And now the 2 Violet Evergarden movies are kind of a transition into animes. Yeah, the first one is Violet Evergarden and the Auto Memory Doll. This is kind of like an extended Violet Evergarden episode. For that sake, it works very well because I think Violet Evergarden is a very wholesome and nice show that I really just enjoyed watching for the most part. Violet Evergarden, the movie, has one part that is also like an extended episode, and that worked very well. But they also had a part that was about how would the story continue after the show ends, and that part was just very bad in my opinion because I liked the ending of the show, and this one just kind of ruined it for me. Altered Carbon Relieved is a movie based on, I think, the Altered Carbon TV show, and I didn't care because I didn't watch the show and I didn't enjoy this movie. Now for some other animes by Netflix, there is Dragon Quest Your Story. This movie was fine, but kind of ruined it in the end with a very annoying, dumb plot twist. Flavors of Youth is an anthology that has very fine stories. I enjoyed it, but I don't remember much of it actually. And Whisker Away should be more annoying because of the kind of annoying characters, but I thought this movie was also very wholesome and had some great animation actually. Words Bubble Up Like Soda Pop is incredible. Like, I didn't expect this movie to be as incredible, but this has a very creative and multifaceted plot that goes in a lot of different directions, and in the end is very wholesome and a great romance actually. Child of Kamiyari Month, I guess this is called, has a great universe that it tries to set up and has a grand plot with mystical creatures, but it tells all of that story with just very annoying exposition through dialogue that just doesn't work at all and just makes the whole movie boring. I know Big Fish and Begonia has a very weird mix of different types of animation and a plot that glances over a lot of emotional points that would be great actually if they were played out a little longer, and so this movie worked in some places but also didn't in some other. A movie directed by Mamoru Hosoda is Summer Wars. This has two parts of a story that are completely different from each other and therefore don't work at all in one movie, even though they would be great separately. His other movie, The Boy and the Beast, was very wholesome but kind of lost me in the end. Makoto Shinkai's very short movie, The Garden of Words, has a great slice of life story, but it isn't really that great because it gets very overdramatic at some points, which kind of annoyed me. Weathering with You, also directed by Makoto Shinkai, is a movie that relies a lot on the story, in my opinion, from another movie that he did. And that makes me not appreciate the whole movie as much, even though I think this is very fun and has some great fun characters and some amazing animation. But yeah, easily his best movie is Your Name. This is a perfect movie. It goes in so many different directions. All those directions make the movie come together in a very great way because the characters have been through such a journey at the end that you just feel every single emotion that they feel at the end. It's such an emotional journey. Yeah, this movie is incredible. Now for some movies that I call advanced anime in a way because they are just kind of the most complicated and very thought-provoking type of animes. One of them is Angel's Egg. I don't get any single thing that this movie did. It's kind of like a poem. It just shows you stuff and you kind of have to make something of it. I guess it's good. Perfect Blue is the type of movie that shows things, but after you talk about it for a few hours, this movie kind of pieces itself together because it's very complicated. But this is just incredible. It has one of the best stories and also saddest stories I think I've ever seen in a movie. Akira, great movie. I saw this more as an action film, but I think there's a lot of layers you can peel back from it after rewatching it a few more times. Now to the Evangelion movies. Yeah, this is a big franchise. The first I watched was Evangelion Death True Square. At least that's how it's spelled in my list. Yeah, I think this movie is bad because it's kind of a recapture of the show, but it doesn't really do a good job because it's only for the people who have already watched the show. Like you can't watch this on its own without the show, so that just kind of makes it pretty worthless. The other movie from the old timeline is Neon Genesis Evangelion: The End of Evangelion. This movie is a fucking masterpiece, easily one of the best movies I think I've ever seen. It talks about a lot of different things I probably didn't pick up on. It just kind of makes you watch the main character just figure out, like, does life even have a point? I think it was very fascinating to watch. And also, there was some fun action in it, but it's mainly just a very emotional journey. Now for the reboot movie series of Evangelion, there's firstly Evangelion 1.11, You Are Not Alone. I think this movie is not as great because it is mostly just like the series and doesn't really try to be its own thing. Like this movie series gets to be its own thing at some point, but not yet in this one. The second one, Evangelion 2.0, You Cannot Advance, is a lot better. It has amazing animation, a lot of different things, and it goes into a very different direction in the end, which I really loved. Evangelion 3.0, You Cannot Redo, is not as great because it has a lot of exposition and it doesn't do a good job at delivering what was changed about the last movie. So it's just kind of an exposition dump. And Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0, Thrice Upon a Time, is so layered. There's so much to this movie that I can't really reflect on it in a good way. I just have to rewatch it again. But I like how big of a change it is from the ending of the original Evangelion series. Of course, I cannot talk about anime without talking about Ghibli. First of all, Hayao Miyazaki's movies in Ghibli. Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind is not a Ghibli movie, but it's Hayao Miyazaki's directorial debut, I think. It's a great adventure story. It's amazingly animated and has a great main character, in my opinion. His first Ghibli movie is The Castle in the Sky, and this is easily the most conventional story that Ghibli has put out, in my opinion, but not in a bad way. I think this is incredibly wholesome and I love it. My Neighbor Totoro is a very fun movie on the surface, but actually has a lot of realistic and sad tones that you don't really pick up on as a kid. Kiki's Delivery Service is easily one of the most wholesome movies I've ever seen. Like, this is just so wholesome and cute. Porco Rosso, one of the most fun movies that Ghibli has ever put out. It's very messy and doesn't work from a story perspective, but I think this is like so funny in my opinion. Princess Mononoke just makes everything that was great about Nausicaa and just doubles it. One of the best movies. Such a grand story with so many great characters and so amazing visuals. And they topped that with Spirited Away just a few years later, and yeah, I mean, this is a masterpiece. I haven't seen this movie as much anymore because I've kind of heard about it too much that I just kind of got sick of it, but I mean, it's great. Howl's Moving Castle doesn't work as well. It's also very messy like Porco Rosso, but doesn't have the humor or, in my opinion, the emotion that would make it more watchable, and so this is just kind of annoying to me. And Ponyo is just cute. Again, not as memorable in my opinion as Kiki's Delivery Service, but still pretty good. His son Goro Miyazaki made Tales of Earthsea, which is not the most appreciated because, in my opinion, the world building is just very boring and not as exciting, but I still think it's more watchable than some of Ghibli's worst movies in my opinion. Goro Miyazaki's best movie is From Up on Poppy Hill. This is just a very wholesome slice of life story that has also a romance in it that works very well. And easily Goro Miyazaki's worst movie is Erwin and the Witch, and it's probably, I made a Ghibli ranked video and I think I had this as the worst Ghibli movie ever, and yeah, this movie doesn't work on any standpoint. Like, it's just incredibly bad in every single way. Isao Takahata is another Ghibli director who made some movies for the studio. Only Yesterday. I mean, this is so incredible. A slice of life story that kind of parallels the childhood of a person with the adulthood of a person, and does that in such an incredible way. I got very emotional, and I think I was at the exact right position in my life when I watched this film, so that it just kind of means a lot to me. Pom Poko is very annoying. I think this is just repetitive and very redundant, and I don't like it as much. My Neighbors the Yamadas tells a lot of anecdotes about this family, the Yamadas, and it's charming for that reason, but it's not as memorable from a story perspective. And The Legend of the Princess Kaguya, one of the best animated movies, like the animation is some of the best I think I've ever seen. This is just such an emotional journey. Hiromasa Yonebayashi, he made The Secret Life of Arrietty, which has some of the best world building considering the fact that you already know the world they live in because it's our world, it's just smaller, but the way they kind of showed the lives of these little people in our world, very amazing. And this other movie, When Marnie Was There, is good, but I don't think this movie is as memorable afterwards, but it's also been a lot of time since I've seen it. Now to all the other Ghibli movies, there is Whisper of the Heart, which is another slice of life story that doesn't mean as much to me because it just didn't speak to me as much, but I think this is also cute and very entertaining. The Cat Returns is one of the least interesting or the least creative Ghibli movie because this whole cat universe is just kind of, yeah, it's there. It has cats, I guess, and a castle in the middle. That's about it. Ocean Waves depicts a story of two people who are just kind of toxic to each other, and it depicts that story in a very emotional and I guess happy way, which doesn't really work and is very conflicting in its tone, so this movie just kind of doesn't work. And The Red Turtle does a lot with visual storytelling. I mean, just like WALL-E in a way, but this is just completely silent. There's no words in the whole movie except for hey once, I think. And yeah, this made me so emotional despite the fact that the main character is just kind of a guy. We're still not done with the animation. I want to talk about all of the other animation movies I have on this list. First of all, stop motion animation. There is Fantastic Mr. Fox, a Wes Anderson movie I didn't really care about. I just didn't think the movie was very exciting, not the humor, not the characters, nothing really. His other movie, Isle of Dogs, was much more interesting to me. I thought the characters were a lot more interesting and it flowed a lot better. But I do have to say, I think it's incredible that the style of Wes Anderson works as well in animation as it works in these two movies. Corpse Bride, a Tim Burton movie. I saw this movie and I thought it was exactly what I expected, and I had no complaints, but it also is not my favorite movie. Same goes with The Nightmare Before Christmas. I didn't expect anything else and it was fun. My Life as a Zucchini is a French film that is incredibly beautiful. This has very fitting animation because it looks very childish and it's about child characters. The way this very short movie deals with the problems of the kids that it has as main characters is just very respectful and very impressive to me. The last stop motion animation movie in this list is The House. It's a Netflix movie consisting of 3 different parts. The first part was great, the second part was great, the third part just kind of annoyed me, and so this movie is at least 2/3 good and 1/3 just okay. Other Netflix animated movies are I Lost My Body, which is a very emotional movie. I don't remember as much of it, but I think it has a very unique story. The Summit of the Gods is a great film. because it kind of shows this obsession about a sport and just makes you understand it. Like, I don't think I would ever want to go mountain climbing on the Mount Everest, but I understand why people do it after this film. And Over the Moon, a musical movie that has a great creative universe that it shows, but it just kind of shows that through very uninteresting characters and annoying songs. A highly appreciated animated movie is The Breadwinner, but I didn't really care about this movie because of its kind of repetitive story, and also the animation is just not my thing. Sausage Party, a Seth Rogen animated movie. This movie is just my thing. Like, I think this movie, if the humor is just not your thing, then this movie just won't appeal to you, but Seth Rogen is my type of humor, and this movie was very much fun. Like Toy Story, I think The Iron Giant is a fun movie with a fine plot, fine characters. It's enjoyable, but on its own it's not really outstanding. Monster House takes a very unique concept and is one of the best horror type of movies for kids. Ernest and Celestine, a very short French movie that is very charming but doesn't really affect me after I watch the movie. Like, it's not forgettable, but also not something I would think about a lot. I was very conflicted on Loving Vincent because even though this has some of the best animation I think I've ever seen, the plot was not as interesting on the first watch, but I think like The Summit of the Gods kind of shows this fascination for mountain climbing. I think this movie gives a great insight on the fascination in art, and I think this movie I respect a lot more after a second watch. And the last animated movie on this list is Tux and Fanny. I don't know why this movie works as well at making me emotional with this very pixely animation and dry humor, but it did, and yeah, I liked it. Some half animated movies, I would say. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, the first one by Platinum Dunes, is very annoying. I think this movie is not as fun, has some storytelling issues, and it's just generally not that entertaining. The second one is a lot less annoying and actually is pretty fun from its story and characters and from its action as well. Even though I love Seth MacFarlane and I love Family Guy and I think American Dad is also pretty fine, Ted was just not my thing at all. I thought this movie was boring and none of the humor really worked for me. Scooby-Doo didn't work for me because I hate Scooby-Doo in this film. I think this very goofy aesthetic of this film works very well, but Scooby kind of ruins it for me because the animation, the humor with his whole character is just bad, and the same thing is with Scooby-Doo Monsters Unleashed. Clifford the Big Red Dog is an uninspiring children's movie that has nothing creative about it. Like, nothing in this movie is not a cliche. And I wish they would have done a lot more with practical effects in this film. And Show Dogs is another movie about talking dogs, and it's just, it's unfunny and it looks very weird. Some movies about video games, I think I'm gonna start with Pixels, because Pixels is actually pretty decent. People hated on this movie a lot, but I think it's a fun movie, and I'm really a person who doesn't really understand why people hate on Adam Sandler so much, because I think this guy's actually pretty funny in some cases. Sonic the Hedgehog is the type of movie that is not really that memorable. I think it was fine, but it was over so quickly and I never really thought about it again. Pokemon Detective Pikachu is fun, and I think it's impressive that even though I'm not a huge Pokemon fan or anything, this movie still made me very interested in the plot. The Super Mario Brothers movie is one of the biggest failures of a film I think I've ever seen. It completely fails to capture anything of the spirit or basically anything about the games, and just, doesn't work at all. Silent Hill, a very underrated. This movie is actually very creepy. It has some great looking moments, some very, very brutal moments, some very tense moments, and I love Pyramid Head. And Pyramid Head is actually the only thing I really remember about the second movie, Silent Hill Revelation. Yeah, I don't think this movie was horrible, but it was just not as memorable, probably. Hitman has some of the most boring and incompetently made action scenes I think I've ever seen, and this movie just kind of got boring after a very short time. And Hitman Agent 47 actually wasn't that bad. I watched this before I watched Hitman, and I thought it was pretty fun. The only thing I expected from Italian Job was the little cars to have an action scene, and they actually delivered a very interesting plot that was very fun to watch. Need for Speed actually really tries to feel like a Transformers movie sometimes, and like a very good drama, but nothing about the drama or anything works because it's very uninteresting, but I thought the action sequences were actually very well filmed. I understand the hate that Free Guy gets, but I don't think this movie is as bad. This has some very fun and funny sequences, especially about the two main characters discovering this world. But yeah, it has way too many references, and Taika Waititi is just awful. A similar movie directed by Steven Spielberg as Ready Player One. This movie was actually pretty good as well, even though I thought the action sequences were easily some of the best things in the whole movie and not really the characters. The first Jumanji movie is the exact type of movie that I like. because this whole big adventure is actually filmed in camera, everything is done practically, and it just makes it much more believable. But I also think Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle is actually pretty great and has a unique spin on the first movie, and is a remake that in my opinion works very well, because it's not just remaking the exact same thing, but instead it uses a similar concept but does something completely new with it, and I appreciate that. And Jumanji The Next Level doesn't really do a lot different from Welcome to the Jungle, but in my opinion was still a very fun, enjoyable film. Moving from one movie about The Rock in the jungle to another movie about The Rock in the jungle, there is Jungle Cruise. This is kind of my fantasy section of this whole series, even though I haven't seen a lot of fantasy movies. Jungle Cruise is the type of movie that is the exact opposite of Jumanji, because nothing is really done practically. The whole world of this movie is done digitally, and it doesn't really look believable, and therefore I just didn't really care about anything that was happening. And the exact opposite is The Never Ending Story, because even though the story isn't as interesting or doesn't really make a lot of sense, the practical effects are just so amazing that it instantly pulls you into this exciting, interesting world. Kind of weird putting Noah into this category, but Noah, directed by Darren Aronofsky, shows how versatile of a director this guy is, because this is a huge production and a very impressive movie exploring the mind of Noah. The Spiderwick Chronicles is in the same way as Monster House, a fine horror type of very dark fantasy movie for children. It was fine, but I think I would like this movie a lot more if I had a little more nostalgia for it. Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events is a movie I had a lot more nostalgia for, and therefore I liked it a lot more. I think this was very creative and very dark. Avatar was a great visual experience. I don't care about the characters a lot in this film, even on a rewatch, but I think this is a huge achievement from James Cameron. Another movie about Avatar is The Last Airbender. This is M. Night Shyamalan's try to make a movie out of one season of one of the best children's shows I've ever seen. And it doesn't work. Nothing about this movie works. Even if it was just messy from a story perspective, everything else about the movie is also bad. And so, this is just awful. The Christmas Chronicles is a fun Christmas movie, and even though only one scene really struck me as something very memorable, I think there was nothing really wrong with it. And Fat Man should be much more fun, because it's such a ridiculous concept, just like Army of the Dead. But just like Army of the Dead, it's also so serious and so boring that it makes the whole movie just worthless to watch. Now moving on to the Harry Potter movies. I haven't watched the Harry Potter movies as a child, so I've only seen them all once. And we made a big marathon with them, so I got tired in basically every single one of these movies, making me not really care about most of the things that were going on, and also not really remember most of the plot points in every single film. So I kind of just have some little scenes that I remember from all of the movies, and not a lot of thoughts about them. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was very boring, because it's mostly just world building, and even though the world building was amazing, I don't think there was anything exciting about the story. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets had less world building, and even though it was also less memorable, I think it was a lot more entertaining to watch. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is directed by Alfonso Cuarón, and it's easily one of the most unique Harry Potter movies because of its different tone and also a very different story. The only Harry Potter movie I've seen was Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and this was a Harry Potter movie with one of the best endings. Harry Potter and the Order of Phoenix was one of the movies that I enjoyed the most without thinking about it too much, and I really just enjoyed this a lot. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince is I don't really remember anything about this movie, to be honest. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 takes the whole story away from Hogwarts, which kind of makes it also very boring. I didn't think this movie was bad in any way, but I also didn't really care about it that much. And in my opinion, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 is the best Harry Potter movie. I loved every single second of it, because even though I didn't always care about everything that was happening in the previous 7 movies, I think this long build-up was very satisfying to see finally pay off in this film, and I think this movie did everything right it could have done. Then there's also Fantastic Beasts. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them is not really an objectively bad movie, but I thought all of the characters were so annoying for the most part that I just didn't really care about them, except for Dan Fogler and Eddie Redmayne's characters, which were pretty charming. Fantastic Beasts and the Crimes of Grindelwald is incredibly messy. There's nothing that works about the story, nothing is very well set up, none of the characters, neither the new ones nor the ones that we already know, are well set up. Nothing really makes sense from a story perspective, and at the end it's just kind of why are we doing this still? This movie really ruined the first one. Even though I didn't even like the first one, I still think there was some potential, but after this one, I just didn't really bother to watch the third one. Now as kind of a segue into some coming of age movies, we have the Twilight films, which are still fantasy, but yeah. Twilight is awful. Nothing about these movies is really good, and none of these movies are entertaining beyond the first like 10 minutes. Like, you start them out and you think this is like really funny because it's quirky and weird, but at some point they just kind of get more and more annoying, and at some point I just stopped caring. Yeah. The first Twilight movie is exactly that. Like, I have nothing else to say about it. It starts off pretty goofy, and then it's just boring as soon as the plot sets in. The Twilight Saga New Moon, I don't even know what was in this movie, but I came for the love triangle, which I didn't really get in this one as much, so just boring. Twilight Saga Eclipse has the love triangle, and I don't even know why the Edward versus Jacob thing was a thing, because Edward is like the most boring character in this whole series, and Jacob is the most unlikable character, and so none of these two are really any good. The Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 1 is the most entertaining, because the first part is kind of like an actually happy movie, but it as soon as CGI baby comes in, yeah, it's just I don't know, man. And the Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 2 has a $130 million budget, and I'm just baffled how they couldn't do anything better with so much money. Some other very bad coming of age romances are, first of all, Not Cool, which is the Shane Dawson movie. It was just unfunny at every single point. SPF 18, I don't even know if they had a script for this film. They just kind of seemed like they improvised everything, improvised the whole plot, didn't have a plan for anything, and yeah, this is just a big waste of time, even though it's not even like 70 hours long, I think. Tall Girl is a movie about people making fun of a very tall girl, and they actually bothered to make a Tall Girl 2 movie and didn't bother to make it like any better. Like, it is even more annoying, and even though in the first movie you kind of had to care about the main character Jodie, in this one you just can't care anymore, because yeah, she's easily the most unlikable character in the whole cast. Like, I don't want to say that because Tall Girl is already so awful, but even more awful probably is The Kissing Booth. Part 1, 2, and 3, I mean, they're all just the same. The Kissing Booth is very annoying, very over happy, and just doesn't work at all. Kissing Booth Part 2 is over 2 hours long, 2 hours and 10 minutes of just very bad, annoying romance drama that never ends, and at this point I'm just wondering why there are 3 parts. But The Kissing Booth 3, I don't even know if it's more annoying or less annoying than the first part, but it's yeah, it's just annoying. Some better romances are The Fault in Our Stars. First of all, even though this is also very overdramatic in some ways, it is at least more watchable because it has a very happy message, especially in the first act. Love, Simon is one of the most forgettable movies like ever. Out of all of these movies, I think this is one that I remember the least, even though I had no scene where I like didn't enjoy it. Like, it's not an unenjoyable movie, but it's also not a movie that I would get anything from. Grease, the musical from the 70s with John Travolta, and yeah, this movie is fucking perfect. This movie is the perfect type of ridiculous. It knows exactly what it is. It has great music, and it's just funny and fun. Like, in general, just so entertaining from every single scene to the next. Yeah, I love this movie. Okay, now these next movies, like, I really don't know what to say about any of them like differently, because they are all kind of in the same category for me. So I will just say that the movie fits into the category when I come to it, and that category is fun, entertaining, and very hilarious teeny comedies that just work very well. But I don't think I took anything emotionally from any of these movies. The first movie of that is 10 Things I Hate About You. The second movie of that is She's All That. She's All That actually has a parody of some sorts, and that is not another teen movie, and this is hilarious. I wish movies like this would exist again, because it's like, this type of movie just doesn't really exist anymore. It's kind of this scary movie type of humor that really works for me. And then there's the remake of She's All That, which is He's All That, directed by the guy who made Mean Girls, and that is just sad because Mean Girls is a good movie. Yeah, He's All That is the same category as movies like The Kissing Booth and Tall Girl, just very cringe, annoying characters. Also some more comedy-oriented coming-of-age movies. There's firstly Moonrise Kingdom, which is a Wes Anderson movie. I did enjoy enjoy. I guess I didn't really care about most of the characters, but I think objectively there's nothing really wrong with this film. Clueless fits into this category. Do Revenge is a very interesting Netflix movie. Like, it's way above the normal Netflix original standard. A very interesting plot that goes into a lot of different directions that sometimes don't work, but in its entirety, I think this is very unique. Superbad is also super unique. It's just a very dumb humor that for some reason like works perfectly because the actors have a great way of delivering it, and the movie has a lot of heart behind it, in the same way that also applies to Booksmart, because Booksmart is kind of a similar plot, but more modern definitely. And yeah, I love both of these movies. I think they are very good, and especially Booksmart has a great soundtrack. The King of Staten Island is about Pete Davidson, or basically about Pete Davidson not really knowing where to go in life, and that just appeals to me a lot, and I really think Pete Davidson is very funny, so I really like this film. Project X, a movie about the best party ever and told through this found footage style, which I think really fits and makes the movie a lot more entertaining than it would actually be. And Yes God Yes has a good concept and a pretty cute main performance, but it was just kind of empty in my opinion. Moving on, I think Legally Blonde fits into this category. Ferris Bueller's Day Off as well. Juno has a very specific feeling, like no movie is like this. The dialogue, the performances, the costume design, like everything is like Juno and nothing else. And even though the movie has a very serious subject matter, they delivered it perfectly in a comedic way. Mean Girls fits into this category. And yeah, I think that's mostly it with the movies that fit into this. And moving on to some less comedic coming of age movies. First of all, there is Speak, which actually applies to a lot of cliches that coming of age movies have, but it does it in a very mature way, and it has serious subject matter. And yeah, therefore I think this is very impressive, even though it doesn't really appeal to me because none of the characters are really relatable for me. 13 is the only movie that made me hope for Catherine Hardwicke making an actual good movie again, but she kind of just doesn't. 13 shows this very rebellious nature of teenagers and actually shows the very dark sides of it, and just continually gets worse and worse and worse and much more depressing, and I really appreciate this movie for that. 8th Grade really makes me hope that Bo Burnham directs another movie, because this is so impressive and has a very realistic tone to it that I don't think anyone replicated as well as this movie did. The Edge of 17 is much more comedic, but it has a very good balance of that, in my opinion, and I really care for the main character a lot. Cuties was obviously very controversial, and I don't think they executed very well what they wanted to say, because they kind of just added to the problem, even though I think this movie is actually pretty well done for the most part. But yeah, they just kind of fucked up on delivering their message in a very big way. The two movies directed by Greta Gerwig are not really my thing. I watched Lady Bird, but I didn't really care about anything that was really happening, and it was just over very quickly. And Little Women was just kind of annoying for the most part, and the only thing I really was interested in the movie was the romance that was developing, but towards the end of the movie they just kind of threw that away, and that just made me care about the movie even less. To the Bone is, in my opinion, a really realistic depiction of this disease, and therefore I think this movie is very impressive and has some very good acting, in my opinion. The Perks of Being a Wallflower really meant a lot to me when I initially watched it, even though I haven't seen this film in a long time. I knew I gave it 5 stars, and I will just keep it at that, because I think this movie is very impressive from a character perspective. I couldn't really connect with Mommy a lot, but I think this movie is very well made from a technical standpoint, because most of the characters are not really that likable on its own, but they create a very interesting chemistry that makes them very likable. Airport Society, one of the best movies delivering this message of, hey, you should enjoy your life to the fullest and don't care what anyone says. Just do what you want to do. And this movie is very incredible and has one of the best performances by Robin Williams. In my opinion, an even better performance than he gave in Good Will Hunting. Even though there are still some sad scenes in this film, I still think that Call Me By Your Name is one of the warmest and most comfortable summer movies I've ever seen, and also the only movie directed by Luca Guadagnino which I could connect with, because Bones and All and Suspiria are both not really my thing. Moonlight is a film I didn't really connect to because I didn't really relate to most of the characters, but this movie definitely needs a rewatch because I didn't really pick up on a lot that was happening in the film when I watched it for the first time a few years ago. Stand By Me is a great slice of life story, and I liked this movie a lot because it also, it exactly felt like the time period it came out of. And if the whole aesthetics of a movie like Raiders of the Lost Ark was just put onto a coming of age movie, this would be that, and I enjoy it. A Celine Sciamma movie is Petite Maman. It's very short, and I don't think I got a lot from watching it, but it was a short, sweet experience of a film. And yeah, Honey Boy, a movie I definitely expected a lot from because Shia LaBeouf is one of my favorite actors, but I kind of overhyped it a little and I thought the two storylines weren't really fitting very well, and so I had a kind of difficult time connecting with the characters. Waves also has two different parts. The first half has a kind of Safdie Brothers style that is very stressful, has a lot of colors, a lot of sounds that make it very stressful, and the second one is very quiet and a lot more emotional, and both of these have a great way of showing a family dealing with a tragedy and dealing with their problems, and I think this is a very powerful movie directed by Trey Edward Schultz, who is very good at making stressful movies because he directed It Comes at Night, and yeah, I really hope this guy makes something else in the future that is just as great as these two movies. Kajillionaire is a movie I can't compare with anything. This has so many different aspects, and yeah, I think this is kind of impressive. Even though I didn't always care about what was happening, I at least appreciated it. The Hand of God, which is an Italian movie, I also appreciated a lot. It feels very all over the place, but that's kind of how it is supposed to be because the main character also doesn't really know where to go in life, and so it really fits. I think this movie is very incredible. And now for the last part of this video, I want to talk about a lot of comedies. First of all, Coming to America. This movie is pretty fine. I'm not really a huge fan of it. It's mostly like a rom-com, but it has some charming performances, but it feels kind of empty and just like not very funny. The second movie, Coming to America, is actually even more empty, like really empty. There's nothing really holding this movie together. It's just filmed in a very boring way. It doesn't really have an exciting plot, and yeah, it's also not really funny. So yeah, The Devil Wears Prada could actually fit into this category again to me, but like not really because it's not a coming of age movie. But yeah, this is just kind of a classic movie that is a lot of fun and very entertaining. Even though the point of The Big Lebowski is apparently to make a just nonsensical movie that is still kind of entertaining, in the end it's not very entertaining because it's not really my type of humor. The best thing that this movie has is like this very repetitive nature of the film that makes the whole plot even more pointless, and in a way that's funny, but to be honest, it's not really my thing. The Terminal is also kind of a rom-com. It's directed by Steven Spielberg, and it's basically Steven Spielberg doing his best at making a very simple plot just as entertaining and as well paced as possible. This movie is very charming and very entertaining in my opinion. I really love it. Onto some more classic comedies. There's first of all, I think the earliest movie on this whole list, and that is Sherlock Jr., a Buster Keaton movie that I expected to be a bit more physical action, but it's a pretty fine funny comedy. I don't really know what to say about it. Monty Python and the Holy Grail is a film I didn't appreciate on the first watch because it just seemed like a kind of cheap, stupid movie. But this has a lot of amazing jokes, like really amazing and creative jokes. Life of Brian 2, I wasn't in the best mood when I watched this movie, but it still was pretty entertaining and had some funny scenes. Year One is actually kind of similar to Life of Brian in a way. It's with Jack Black and Michael Cera, and this movie like has a lot of dumb humor, but I think this movie really works, and it feels very old school actually, like the type of comedy that wouldn't be made anymore nowadays. Airplane is a classic comedy directed by the guys I've already mentioned in the previous video, directing Scary Movie 3 and Scary Movie 4. This is very funny, very creative. I like it. Hot Shots, not the most creative movie. I think this has a lot of boring, dull moments. I think Hot Shots Part 2 is actually an improvement on every single level because it's much more funny, much more creative, and kind of knows more what it is. It's much more ridiculous as well, and so yeah, I think this is just a lot funnier. The Naked Gun is a movie I watched when I was in like a really bad mood, and this movie just distracted me because it is so incredibly funny. Like every single joke in this movie works so well because every joke just builds on it and builds and builds and builds until it's just the most ridiculous, stupid shit, but it's still so funny. And yeah, this movie works perfectly. The Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult. It's the third movie in the Naked Gun franchise. I haven't seen the second one, and I think this third one isn't as good as the first because the jokes in the first one relied on like very ridiculous jokes in a very serious environment, but the third movie just kind of gets so ridiculous that it's not believable anymore, and I just thought this movie was boring because it's not that funny. Onto a movie about real people or pranks being played on real people. First of all, there's Bad Trip, a movie that came out on Netflix with Eric Andre that I found to be incredibly hilarious. I actually even cared about the characters, even though that was like the most unimportant part about the whole movie. It obviously concentrates more on the skits, but still, the chemistry between Eric Andre and Lil Rel Howery is just so great that I really found myself caring about the story as well. Borrowed Cultural Learnings of America for Make Benefit Glorious Nation of Kazakhstan is a amazing film. When I watched this the first time, I actually didn't even think that they were pranking all of these people. Like, I actually thought this movie was just kind of acted out by people, but no, the fact that these are all skits and this is all kind of not even planned, yeah, I think it's just incredibly impressive. The second Borat film is also like pretty great. Borat's subsequent movie film, Delivery of Prodigious Bribe, the American regime for Make Benefit Once Glorious Nation of Kazakhstan, is concentrating more on making like a more cinematic movie, more than just like making a very funny movie. I think this is less funny than the first one, but more interesting from its plot. But it's still like very funny. I didn't really know if I should include the Jackass movies, but I guess I just doing it because Jackass the movie is the title of the film. So I mean, it's a movie. Yeah, I think the Jackass films are great. They are very hilarious. The first movie has more of an underground feeling, in my opinion, that I didn't really enjoy when I first watched it because I wasn't really into this humor a few years ago. But over the course of time, I got to know all of the people behind Jackass a lot more from different videos and YouTube and whatever. So I just kind of grew a lot on these people. Therefore, also the second one is much more enjoyable. Also because they have a lot more production value. Like, they had a lot more budget for every single movie, I think. And so Jackass number 2 is more enjoyable than Jackass the movie, and Jackass 3D is more enjoyable than the second movie. Jackass 4.5, I didn't really know if I should include this one because it's more of a documentary about Jackass Forever, which I haven't seen, but I mean, why not? It's still pretty fine. Another movie I wasn't sure to include, but I guess this is just so cinematic that I have to, which is Bo Burnham's Inside. This is such an emotional journey. Yeah, I really enjoy every single song in this special, in this 90-minute special. I think they are also well produced, and making everything take place in one room really brings out the best creative decisions out of Bo Burnham. I think this is just an impressive piece. Now for some comedies with Seth Rogen. There's first of all The 40-Year-Old Virgin. I think this is enjoyable rom-com type of movie that has a lot of charming and charismatic performances, and yeah, that's it. Neighbors actually has Seth Rogen not playing a stoner, and that is pretty impressive. And this movie was also like entertaining, but not really my favorite thing because there's not much to it. It's just very on the nose with its humor. This Is the End is so ridiculous and like the perfect type of ridiculous. It gave us Michael Cera on cocaine, and that's just amazing. Like, all of these people playing themselves, or the most superficial version of themselves, is like so entertaining. The Night Before is actually one of my favorite Christmas movies ever. Like, this actually isn't even bad or anything. This isn't like so bad it's good. That movie, this actually has a pretty good plot and great characters that I could actually care for. Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays a guy who I really cared for. This is kind of a mix of a lot of different movies mixed with the humor of Seth Rogen. And I would just say, if you enjoy Seth Rogen with this sweater, going into a church, puking because he's so high on marijuana, and then this is exactly your movie. Now for two Amy Schumer movies. The first one is Snatched. I only watched this film because I wanted to see I Feel Pretty, but I picked the wrong movie, and so I watched this instead. This is just a movie where the two lead performances are completely outshined by all the side characters, and it's just pretty boring for the most part. And I Feel Pretty, again, is the same, basically. Amy Schumer is constantly outshined by all of the side characters, and it's just not that funny in general. Now for some Happy Madison movies. First of all, Sandy Wexler. This is just a very dragged out movie that has so little substance. Like, it's only half watchable because Adam Sandler gives a kind of charismatic and fun performance, but it actually has so little content to it that it just feels like you are in this constant, never-ending dream that just goes on your nerves and you just want to leave, but it just never ends. And it's, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like kind of watchable, but also like really boring. Hubie Halloween is a movie that Adam Sandler only did because he wanted to make the worst movie ever after not getting a nomination for Uncut Gems at the Oscars. And I mean, this was actually like pretty fine. It's a murder mystery and it's pretty entertaining and has a very quirky performance by Adam Sandler that I actually really enjoyed. Just like Sandy Wexler, The Week Off is just very annoying and has so little content to it. It's just 2 hours of very boring, nothing humor that doesn't work. Paul Blart Mall Cop is a movie that should not work because it's basically just, hey, this guy's fat, look at him. But Kevin James gives such a charismatic performance that I really do not care. I think this movie is actually pretty enjoyable. Paul Blart Mall Cop 2 is kind of enjoyable still. It's more about the character of Paul Blart, but the last act is filled with a lot of action that is actually pretty entertaining. So I don't hate these two movies, even though they are not the greatest. They are objectively mediocre. The Ridiculous Six really sticks to its title because this is a Western movie by Adam Sandler that is just so incredibly ridiculous with its humor. Like, this has some of the worst jokes I think I've ever seen, but he fully commits to all of these jokes, and I just have to respect it. Like, this movie is so awful, but so respectable for just not saying no to any joke, as bad as it actually is. Grown Ups is actually a pretty enjoyable movie. It's like watching Adam Sandler go on a summer vacation with his friends and they just filmed it. It's pretty entertaining and I don't have a problem with it. Grown Ups 2 is not that good. It has a lot more annoying characters and annoying humor and like disgusting humor, but I still think the concept is like pretty good, and it's still a very wholesome movie because I watched this as a child very often, so I have a soft spot for it. Billy Madison is just Adam Sandler going 100% with every single joke. Like, he delivers such an over-the-top performance that it just is incredibly entertaining. And You Don't Mess with the Zohan is actually like a pretty good movie. Like, this movie feels like the type of movie I would want from Adam Sandler. They actually had some good jokes in it. They had some good action with it. And this movie is the perfect type of ridiculous, so that it's not too much, but also not boring. The Dictator, a movie by Sacha Baron Cohen, is a movie I kind of connect with You Don't Mess with the Zohan because it's in a way a little similar. But this is just a fun movie by Sacha Baron Cohen. I don't know what else to say about it. Two Adam McKay movies. The first is The Big Short. I felt very stupid watching this movie, and it's just not my thing, even though I still think it's like objectively not bad. It's just so complicated and I couldn't really follow it, even if they sometimes tried to make this movie very understandable and kind of are talking down to the audience by just saying, hey, here's Margot Robbie in a bathtub explaining you this, but I still didn't get it, so I don't know. Not my thing. Don't Look Up is much more my thing. This movie is pretty entertaining. I thought this movie was actually pretty smart at commenting on all the problems that it was commenting, and it was very fitting for the time that it came out when COVID hit. And I thought this was really great as a concept, had some great performances, but it had so much stupid and unnecessary humor that dragged out the movie a lot, and that just wasn't needed because the realistic parts of the movie were actually very well executed. And now all the other comedies I have on this list. Hangover is basically a classic at this point. I have nothing to say about this movie. I think this is a great film. It has great performances, a very unique concept that just works perfectly, and I could watch this any day and would not be bored with it. Hangover 2 tries to make the same thing again, and even though it is actually like very lazy, I still think it works because the concept is just that great and it changes up enough to make it still new and fresh. Hangover 3 is still fun. I don't think this movie was like very necessary, but I'm glad that it kind of ended this trilogy and didn't do the exact same thing as the first two movies again. And The Hangover Games is this kind of very cheap comedy that has a lot of jokes. Only half of them are like actually smart jokes. Half of the movie I was watching it with my friend and I was actually like laughing a lot, but the other half we watched this and just thought, wow, how can a movie be so bad? 30 minutes or less, a very fast-paced movie that I enjoyed a lot. For the most part, this has very energetic, fun performances that I just thought were great. Game Night is in the same way, like very fast-paced. It moves very quickly. There's a lot of dialogue, but also a lot of plot that you have to follow. There's constantly something new, and I think this movie is incredible. It's so funny. I love Jesse Plemons in this film. He is easily the highlight of this film. He plays such a quirky character and he just does it perfectly. I enjoyed this movie a lot. Scott Pilgrim is easily Edgar Wright's best movie, his most energetic, his most crazy film, but just the perfect balance. Again, like, it's not too much, but it's also like not boring. Tag is a fine movie about people playing tag. I love Hannibal Buress, that's why I watched this movie, and I wasn't disappointed and I wasn't bored. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is a 2-hour drug trip that is just very entertaining to watch, and it feels very authentic the way they portrayed these two characters having all these trips and taking all these drugs. I think it's very entertaining. One of my childhood favorite movies is RV. I think this is a fun family comedy that has very annoying moments but still works very well, especially because of Robin Williams' performance. We're the Millers actually has a lot of shocking humor that I didn't expect, even though, I mean, it's obviously about criminals and strippers and drugs, but still, I didn't expect so much shocking and vulgar humor in this movie. That was quite refreshing, even though the movie at some point got like very serious and it just didn't fit the ridiculous tone of the story. Unlike Ted, I actually enjoyed A Million Ways to Die in the West because this is the exact type of movie that I would want from Seth MacFarlane. I think this works. I think this was incredibly entertaining. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood doesn't just do a good job at being a hangout movie about these characters living in this time period, but it actually is like a great portrayal of this time period. And I love how it just kind of characterizes all these characters by just watching you go through their daily life and struggling with very little things actually, but they are kind of meaning a lot to these characters. I think this is an incredible movie and easily one of my favorite performances by Brad Pitt. Wes Anderson's newest movie is The French Dispatch, and this was fun. I'm not really sure if I like this because I didn't really connect with the first and the second stories in this film, but the third one was so entertaining that I could just kind of appreciate this movie a lot for doing so many different things in just one movie. Meg and Devin Go to School is a stoner comedy with Snoop Dogg and Wiz Khalifa. I don't know what to rate this movie. And yeah, that's about it. 7 Psychopaths, a Martin McDonagh film that goes in a lot of different directions and has like a very complicated plot. I don't think this movie works always, but it's still very interesting and incredibly well written. White Chicks, the movie by the Wayans brothers about 2 black cops dressing as white girls, and I mean, this is so ridiculous. It has some boring moments, like the humor is sometimes as bad as Scary Movie 2, but also sometimes as good as Scary Movie. And yeah, I think this is the perfect type of ridiculous movie that I really have to rewatch because wow, just wow. Nothing to Declare, a French comedy that's yeah, just fine. I have nothing really to say about it. It was watchable. The Netflix comedy I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore has a tone of Wes Anderson and a plot like Martin McDonagh, and it's kind of an interesting mix and just works very well. Like I think this is an interesting movie and a very unique film as well. With The Bubble, Judd Apatow came in and made a movie for April Fool's Day that's just kind of the biggest waste of time I think I've ever had with a film, simply because it's just 2 hours of nothingness, and they try to excuse it with, hey, I mean, it was boring and bad, but at least you were entertained. But I can't say I was entertained. I think this movie was made to piss people off, and I mean, I am pissed off because I wasted 2 hours of my time. I want to say but there's no but. This movie is just bad and very unentertaining. And the last movie of this video is Thunder Force. This is a Netflix comedy about Melissa McCarthy and Octavia Spencer becoming superheroes, and this movie has a lot of very bad and annoying improvisational comedy. The best part about this movie is Jason Bateman as a crap super villain type thing. I don't know what exactly he was, and he was very entertaining and had a lot of great dry humor. 490, almost half done. Thank you for watching. This video was much longer than I expected it to be, especially in comparison to the first one. Stay tuned for the next video, I guess, where I'm going to talk about sci-fi and action.